Imagine sitting down to watch a kid's toy movie in 1995, expecting something cute and harmless, and walking out of the theater completely changed. That's not an exaggeration. Toy Story did exactly that to an entire generation. But what a lot of people don't realize, and this is where it gets interesting, is that the story didn't stop there. It kept growing, branching out into shorts, series, specials, spin-offs, and today we're talking about 43 different productions that form a complete, cohesive universe with a level of depth most serious films don't even come close to. 43. Let that number sit with you for a second. And the craziest part isn't the quantity. It's the fact that Pixar Animation Studios managed, over the course of 30 years, to keep the soul of that universe almost completely intact. How do you even do that? How do you take such a simple concept, toys that come to life when no one's looking, and turn it into a decades-long franchise without losing what made it special in the first place? That's exactly what we're breaking down today. Welcome to Cartoon Zone, and before we dive in, there's one thing we need to talk about that most Toy Story videos completely ignore: the insane level of risk back in 1995. Pixar wasn't the creative and commercial powerhouse it is today. It was a small studio with a relatively lean team, working with technology that was way too new for what they were trying to do, betting everything on a fully computer-animated feature film at a time when that simply didn't exist in theaters. Meanwhile, Walt Disney Animation Studios had just gone through its renaissance with The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, and The Lion King, all hand-drawn, all with that classic look audiences loved and thought was untouchable. And then Pixar shows up wanting to replace that entire process with computers, to tell the story of a pull-string cowboy doll and a space ranger who doesn't even realize he's a toy. From a business standpoint, it looked like calculated suicide, and it turned into one of the biggest successes in animation history. What made Toy Story work wasn't the technology, despite all the media attention at the time focusing on it. The technology was just the vehicle. What really made it work was the brutally honest core conflict. Woody doesn't enter the movie as a hero. He shows up as an insecure guy who's afraid of losing his relevance, who sabotages anyone that threatens his position, who acts out of jealousy and then tries to justify his own behavior. That's not your typical kids' movie protagonist. That's a flawed, deeply human character, someone we've all seen in ourselves or in people close to us. Buzz Lightyear arriving in Andy's room isn't just a new toy showing up. It's that new coworker everyone pretends to welcome, except for the one person whose position is suddenly at risk. And Woody, who's always been the favorite, the leader, the center of everything, has absolutely no idea how to deal with that. Buzz, on the other hand, has one of the best developed arcs in the entire franchise. And the detail that elevates him from a comedic character into something much more interesting is this: he genuinely believes he's a space ranger. He's not pretending, he's not playing a role. He wakes up in that room fully convinced he's a hero on a mission. And everything the world throws at him that contradicts that belief gets interpreted as part of a hostile environment he needs to navigate. When reality finally hits, when he sees that TV commercial and watches himself being sold as a toy with optional accessories and a 90-day warranty, that moment carries a weight far beyond anything animation had delivered up to that point. It's an identity crisis treated seriously inside a kid's action comedy. Pixar Animation Studios doesn't soften it. They let Buzz truly fall apart. The movie built around these two arcs is pure fun. The neighborhood adventure, Sid's house and his disturbingly modified toys, the final race to catch up with the moving truck. But what really sticks, what makes Toy Story the foundation for everything that comes after, is that combination of accessible surface-level humor with genuine emotional depth underneath. That's the formula, and Pixar would stick with it for the next 30 years. Toy Story 2, released in 1999, is where the franchise proves the first movie wasn't just luck. And it does that in a very smart, specific way. Instead of repeating the original structure, it completely flips it. In the first film, the conflict came from within: Woody versus Buzz, ego versus ego, all inside Andy's room. In the second, the threat comes from the outside, from the larger world, and it takes a form no one expected. A collector named Al, who steals Woody because the toy is worth a fortune in the Japanese collectibles market. The reveal of Woody's past is one of the most well-crafted moments in the entire franchise. He's part of a line called Woody's Roundup, a 1950s TV show that never aired because Sputnik suddenly turned cowboys into pop-culture dinosaurs overnight. There are 3 other toys in the line: Jessie the cowgirl, Stinky Pete the prospector, and Bullseye, Woody's horse. And Al wants to reunite all 4 to sell the complete set to a museum in Japan for an absurd amount of money. Jessie becomes the emotional core of the film in a way the script carefully builds before delivering all at once. Her scene set to When She Loved Me, showing through flashback how she was once the favorite toy of a girl named Emily, how deeply she was loved, and how she was slowly forgotten as Emily grew up, until the day she was casually given away, hits like a punch to the gut. It works because Pixar Animation Studios has the courage to let that pain exist without rushing to resolve it. There's no instant comfort, no quick optimistic turnaround 30 seconds later. Just the raw reality that toys are made to be loved and then left behind. And Jessie lived through that entire process, coming out the other side with a wound that never fully healed. Stinky Pete, the film's villain, works because his motivation is completely understandable. He was never opened, never loved by a child. He spent decades sitting in a store box, watching everything around him get bought and taken away, and built an entire philosophy around the idea that preservation is better than love. He's not a monster. He's a bitter character who made peace with his own loneliness by turning it into an ideology. The film's central moral conflict, the one Woody has to resolve within himself, is exactly that. What's better for a toy? To be loved, played with, worn down, eventually stored away and forgotten by a child who grew up? Or to be preserved forever in a museum, untouched, permanent, admired by adults who will never actually play with you? The answer the movie gives is an answer, not the answer. And that's what makes it more honest than most sequels out there. But neither of the first 2 films prepares you for the third. Toy Story 3, released in 2010 after an 11-year gap, is a different kind of movie, both in nature and intention. It's not just deeper, it's heavier, more honest about things animated movies usually avoid out of fear of unsettling family audiences. Andy is 17, he's leaving for college, and the toys that were his companions for over a decade are sitting in a box in the attic, waiting for what might be the last decision he ever makes about them. The structure of the film's third act, with Sunnyside Daycare presenting itself as a paradise before revealing its true nature as a prison, is one of the most elegant narrative constructions in the trilogy. Lotso, the strawberry-scented pink teddy bear who runs Sunnyside with an iron grip, is a layered villain whose backstory unfolds gradually throughout the second act. He too was loved. He too was lost by his child, Daisy, who left him at a gas station during a trip and never came back. Lotso eventually found his way back to Daisy's house, but when he got there, he discovered she had replaced him with another identical Lotso. That moment broke something fundamental inside him, and instead of processing that pain in any healthy way, as if any toy could, he built an entire philosophy around the idea that toys are disposable, that children will always abandon them, and that hierarchy and control are the only rational response. What makes Lotso work as a villain is that he's wrong in a way you can still understand. His pain is real. The conclusion he draws from it is distorted, but it follows an internal logic that makes him far more threatening than a villain driven by pure evil. The incinerator scene is one of the boldest moments Walt Disney Animation Studios has ever approved in a film aimed at children, at least since The Lion King. The toys, face to face with absolute end, no visible escape, looking at each other, holding hands, accepting what's coming. Pixar Animation Studios lets that moment exist long enough to feel real. There's no immediate solution, it's just them, together, confronting the inevitable. And then the aliens show up with the claw and save the day, but the weight of those few seconds doesn't go away. Any kid who watched that felt something they probably didn't have the words for at the time. Any adult knew exactly what it was. Andy's goodbye to Bonnie in her backyard is the other side of that emotional weight. He introduces each toy with a level of care and attention that says more about what they meant to him than any line of dialogue ever could. It's not disposal, it's a passing of the torch. And when Andy finally drives away and looks back in that moment, the cycle that started in the summer of 1995 closes with a kind of dignity that entire franchises chase and rarely achieve. A lot of people see Toy Story 3 as the natural, definitive ending of the series, and it's almost impossible to discuss that without stepping into personal preference. Toy Story 4, released in 2019, arrives with a structural problem before any creative decision even comes into play. It has to justify its own existence after an ending that felt like it had nothing left to say. The solution the script finds is to place Woody in a space the franchise had never explored before: active irrelevance, the gradual erasure of purpose. Bonnie isn't Andy. She doesn't have the same bond with Woody that Andy built over the years. She has her own favorites, and Woody isn't one of them. He sits in the closet, he watches from a distance, and the entire identity he built over 3 films, being the leader, being the responsible one, being the toy others follow, starts to fall apart because its foundation, being needed by a child, no longer exists. Forky enters that context as one of the most original concepts Pixar Animation Studios has ever created. A disposable plastic spork that Bonnie turns into a toy during a school craft project, with googly eyes and popsicle stick arms, brought into existence with consciousness but no framework to process it. He doesn't want to be a toy. He sees himself as trash, literally. He spends the entire movie trying to throw himself away because the only identity reference he has is the material he's made from. It's a brilliant concept that opens up real philosophical questions. What makes something a toy? Is it the material, the intention, the affection of the person using it? But the film doesn't explore those ideas with the depth they deserve. Forky ends up functioning more as comic relief than as a philosophical vehicle, and that's a genuine waste of an extraordinary premise.
Bo Peep's return completely reframes the film's dynamic. She disappeared between the second and third movies without explanation, and when we meet her again, she's been fully transformed. She's a lost toy, living free without an owner, navigating the outside world with a level of confidence and independence Woody never even considered possible. She represents a third option the previous films never really put on the table. Beyond being loved by a child or preserved in a museum, there's the possibility of simply existing on your own terms, building different kinds of connections, not depending on any child to have a sense of purpose. The ending is still divisive, and probably always will be, because in some ways it contradicts everything the previous 3 films built as the franchise's core philosophy. Woody chooses to stay with Bo. He chooses freedom. He chooses a life without structure, without belonging to any one person. And that's a paradigm shift that part of the audience embraced as growth, while another part saw it as a betrayal of the character. Personally, I think the film's central question is valid and interesting. The execution has real pacing issues, especially in the second act, and the antique shop, where a big chunk of the story takes place, doesn't quite sustain the tension the script is aiming for. But the question Toy Story 4 asks, what do you do when the purpose that defined you no longer exists, is a real adult question, and the franchise had every right to ask it. Now here's the part most conversations about Toy Story completely ignore. The 4 films are just the tip of the iceberg. What's underneath is where the true scale of this universe becomes clear. In 1996, just 1 year after the original film, the Walt Disney Company produced Toy Story Treats, 16 ultra-short segments, each just a few minutes long, aired between commercials on ABC during the Saturday morning block, ABC Saturday Morning. The logic was simple. The characters already had an audience, short-form content was relatively cheap to produce, and there was a consistent weekly exposure window. Each segment took a simple idea and pushed it to the extreme. Bath Time shows Woody and Buzz dealing with the concept of taking a bath in ways that completely ignore any real-world logic. Buzz Lightyear Rocket Rescue throws Buzz into a mission that only makes sense inside his own head. Ham and Eggs leans all the way into the obvious pig pun with exactly the level of commitment bad puns deserve. Sid's Workbench revisits the disturbing modified toys from the first film, expanding their mythology without needing a full narrative. The other segments, Buzz Takes a Bath, Cookie Carnage, Egg Sitter, Heavy Metal Mater, Lift Off, Off the Wall, Party Line, Roller Bob, Sleepy Time, Strange Things, The Artist, and What's Up Woody each come with their own absurd premise and internal logic. They don't add anything to the official canon, and most fans have never even seen them, but they demonstrate something important. Pixar Animation Studios realized very early on that these characters had comedic and expressive life beyond the main storyline. They could carry completely disconnected scenarios and still remain recognizable, and still work. Buzz Lightyear of Star Command is where the franchise does something very few IPs have ever had the creativity to attempt. In 2000, the Walt Disney Company first released a 72-minute pilot movie, followed by a full animated series with 65 episodes across 2 seasons, exploring Buzz as an actual space hero. But the detail that elevates this from a simple spin-off into something much more interesting is its meta layer. Within the logic of the Toy Story universe, Buzz Lightyear of Star Command is the TV show that exists inside that world. It's the cartoon Andy and his friends watched, the one that led to the merchandising, which led to the Buzz Lightyear toy that shows up in Andy's room in the first movie. The toy that genuinely believes he is a space hero exists because he was modeled after a fictional space hero who has his own animated series within that same universe. It's fiction creating product, creating belief, creating fiction all over again, one layer on top of another. The series presents the real Buzz, voiced again by Tim Allen, with an origin story that shows how he formed his Space Ranger team, how his rivalry with Emperor Zurg began, and how the values the toy internalized were originally built. Some episodes work really well as kids' action sci-fi, with different villains and missions each week. It's not the most sophisticated thing Disney produced during that era. It's nowhere near the level of Batman the Animated Series or even the best episodes of X-Men the Animated Series, but it has a certain early 2000s charm and an internal consistency that makes it more than just a merchandising vehicle. After Toy Story 3, with the characters entering a new phase under Bonnie's care, Pixar Animation Studios produced the Toy Story Tunes, 3 shorts that act like epilogues to the original trilogy, each with its own identity and focus. Hawaiian Vacation 2011 is probably the most beloved of the 3, and for good reason. Ken and Barbie, the duo introduced in Toy Story 3 who completely stole the show with their perfect comedic chemistry, plan to spend a vacation in Hawaii, but end up stuck in Bonnie's room while she travels with her parents. The other toys decide to recreate a Hawaiian experience for them in the most creative ways they can. Wallpaper becomes a sunset, a makeshift beach appears, live music fills the room. The short works because Ken and Barbie are an inherently absurd and charming couple. Him obsessed with outfits and fashion in a way the original film explored brilliantly, her more grounded and emotionally intuitive. And because watching the toys come together to create happiness for 2 of their own is genuinely touching without ever feeling forced. Small Fry, 2011, takes a more inventive approach. Buzz gets temporarily replaced by a miniature version of himself, a cheap plastic toy that came from a kid's fast food meal, who shows up in Bonnie's room full of confidence, but completely lost when it comes to functioning in a real environment. The short uses this switch to deliver a light critique of kids' meal culture and the value we place on cheap, disposable versions of things that have clearly superior counterparts. It's not subtle, but it's well executed, with genuinely well-crafted comedic moments. Partysaurus Rex 2012 is the most inventive of the 3 and the one that best uses material already established in the main films. Rex, the plastic dinosaur who is consistently the most anxious, insecure, and nervous member of the core cast, always worried about not being good enough, always sabotaging himself before even trying, accidentally finds a group of bath toys in a tub who need someone capable of turning on the faucet. He does it, and suddenly there's a full-on party happening, everyone celebrating Rex, everyone wanting to be around him. The short is small and silly on the surface, but it has real heart because Rex's arc, finally finding a place where his limitations don't matter and his specific abilities are exactly what the group needs, hits way harder than you'd expect for something so simple. The 2013 and 2014 TV specials expanded the franchise in different but complementary ways.
Toy Story of Terror 2013, a 30-minute special, uses its format to do something the series had never fully committed to before: real suspense. The toys get stranded at a roadside motel during a trip, and one by one, they start mysteriously disappearing. The structure leans fully into horror storytelling, characters vanishing in sequence, a claustrophobic and threatening setting, tension building without immediate payoff, and the special has enough discipline to maintain that atmosphere without undercutting it with constant jokes. Jessie is the emotional core here, dealing with a sense of claustrophobia tied directly to her abandonment backstory. It's a detail that connects the special back to Toy Story 2 in a way that rewards longtime fans without alienating newcomers. Produced by Pixar Animation Studios, it shows how flexible this universe can be tonally. Toy Story That Time Forgot 2014 goes for a more ambitious idea. The toys visit a friend of Bonnie's and encounter a group of warrior dinosaurs called the Battlesaurs, who genuinely believe they are real dinosaurs, never played with, living inside an elaborate fantasy of constant combat and tribal hierarchy, treating the idea of being toys as heresy. The echo of Buzz's arc from the first film is intentional and effective. The special's self-awareness, using a new character to re-examine one of the franchise's core themes from a different angle, works far better than simply trying to repeat what had already worked before.
Lamp Life, 2020, released on Disney+, is technically an 8-minute short, but it functions as a far more important narrative piece than its runtime suggests. It answers one of the key questions Toy Story 4 raises without fully resolving. What happened to Bo Peep? How did she go from a shelf toy attached to a lamp in Andy's room, present in the first two films as a secondary character with a defined personality, to this completely transformed, independent, self-sufficient figure we meet in the fourth movie? Lamp Life fills that gap by showing how Bo was sold, how she passed through different owners, how she ended up out in the world, and how she learned not just to survive, but to thrive without belonging to anyone. It's a story about autonomy and reinvention that gives retroactive weight to everything she represents in Toy Story 4. Without Lamp Life, Bo's transformation feels like it came out of nowhere. With it, that transformation has a story, and that story matters. Forky Asks a Question is where the franchise does something genuinely different from anything it had tried before. It's a series of 10 episodes, each around 4 minutes long, also available on Disney+, where Forky, the disposable spork with newly acquired consciousness and zero social filters, tries to understand basic human concepts using the most literal, unfiltered logic imaginable. What is Money explores the idea of value through the eyes of something that was literally trash until yesterday. What is a Friend questions the criteria for friendship in a way that ends up being more honest than most adult conversations about it. What is Art might be the most interesting episode, using Forky's innocence to ask questions about creation and meaning that art theorists spend decades debating without reaching a consensus. What is time? What is love? What is a computer? What is leadership? What is cheese? What is reading? And what is a pet? Each one takes a different concept and runs it through the mind of a being that just became conscious, producing results that are sometimes purely comedic and other times accidentally profound. The format works because Forky has no layer of social conditioning. He asks the kinds of questions young children ask, and that adults stop asking because they've learned that some things are just the way they are. But when you strip that conditioning away, some of the most basic questions about how the world works turn out to have surprisingly shaky answers.
The Pixar popcorn shorts from 2021 sit on the exact opposite end of the spectrum in terms of ambition. They're extremely short with no sustained narrative, focused entirely on quick, situational humor. To Fitness and Beyond drops Buzz into a workout routine that only makes sense through the lens of someone who still processes reality like a space ranger. Ducky and Bunny, Love, takes the two plush characters who stole scenes in Toy Story 4 and throws them into a conversation about love that spirals out of any kind of rational track almost immediately. Ducky and Bunny, Three Heads, fully embraces absurdity, no breaks, no justification, which is exactly what those two characters demand. They're silly, they're fast, and they work precisely because they don't try to be anything more than that. And then there's Lightyear.
Released in June 2022, it's the boldest and riskiest swing the franchise has ever taken in terms of reshaping audience expectations. The premise is genuinely creative. The film is presented as the sci-fi blockbuster that exists within the Toy Story universe. Specifically, the movie Andy watched as an 11-year-old in 1995 that made him want a Buzz Lightyear toy in the first place. It's not about the toy, it's about the fictional character inside the fiction that inspired the toy inside the fiction. It's meta layered on top of meta, and when you stop to think about it, it's an incredibly ambitious idea. This version of Buzz, voiced by Chris Evans instead of Tim Allen, is a test pilot for the USSC, not a cosmic space ranger with exaggerated toy-like traits. He's human, limited, fallible, and he's dealing with a navigational mistake that strands an entire colony on a hostile planet. His attempt to fix that mistake through test flights using hyperspeed fuel that trigger relativistic time dilation, causing decades to pass for everyone else while he ages only days, is the emotional core of the film. Every time he returns from a mission, the people around him have aged years. His closest friend and partner, Alicia, lives an entire lifetime while he's still trying to solve a problem he created. This is adult sci-fi drama, clearly influenced by films like Interstellar and the kind of hard science fiction from the 80s that used technology as a vehicle to explore complex human emotions. The score by Michael Giacchino is excellent. The animation reaches a level of near photorealistic detail that Pixar animation studios had never sustained for this long before. And there are genuinely strong emotional beats, especially in Buzz's relationship with Alicia and later with her granddaughter Izzy, who becomes his partner in the film's present timeline.